Good morning, teachers. Today's math warm-up for accelerating math for our students as they return back to school or any year, all year long. This one's called Tall 10. You can also call it Fab 5. The goal of it is to place a number on the board that kind of aligns with your grade level or whatever you're teaching, and to have the students tell you 10 things or 5 about the number. For example, they may say something like, oh, this number has this number of digits. So let's ignore the half for right now. Let's say they can say, oh, that number has 3 digits. The names, the values of those digits are such and such. They may be able to say if that number is odd or even. They may be able to say, oh, that's a whole number, or that's a fraction, or that's a decimal. They may be able to say, oh, the way you say that number, here's that number in word form. This is what it looks like in standard form or number form. They may be able to, at some point, say, oh, hey, that number is divisible by 5 or 10 or 2. So you can provide them with prompts. Originally, when I first start as a form of kind of like formative assessment, I'll just give the number and say, what can you tell me about that number? And if the most my students can tell me about that number is 3 or 4 things, and I hear things like, oh, the number is greater than 400, or the number is less than so and so, and they never use words like odd or even or prime or composite, depending on your grade level, or a whole number or a fraction. I may introduce that, and not all of it, but I may say, hey, you know what? I'm going to add something to our tall 10 that I noticed about that number. I noticed that if you were to add 10 to that number, it'd be such and such. Or I noticed if you multiply that number by 0, it'd still be 0. And I know that may sound like a simple thing, but depending on what grade you teach, if you do this every day, depending with different numbers, your students will get in that pattern of saying, oh, that is odd, that is even, that is prime or composite, that is divisible by that number. If you multiply by 1, it's the same number. If you multiply by 0, it's 0. Certain patterns will pop in their head. If I just add 1, it's this. If I subtract 1, it's this. If I divide it by 10 and it already ends in 0, it's going to be this. So they'll start to, that daily practice of those math stretches will start slowly, that repetition will embed in their brains of, and the cool thing is sometimes you'll have the child who'll say something that the other students just totally don't even realize, but it's almost like that cute envy, where they're like academic envy, where they're like, I'm going to say that answer tomorrow. Like, I didn't realize, what divisible meant today, but after like 2 weeks of hearing Carla always talk about divisible by, she thinks she's so smart. Watch. Next time I'm going to say, oh, when I see that number that ends in a 0, it's divisible by, and they get that feeling of, whatever their motivation is or how long it takes them to build that confidence to say something different than what they normally call out. That's a good thing. The other thing with this one, with tall 10 or fab 5, I'll say, okay, you all, where would you see that number where it would make sense? What type of sentence or word problem or situation would that number make sense? And you can say, okay, would it make sense if I said there were 495 students in the building? And you get their understanding of what they think makes sense. You can even give them some data and say, well, in our building, there are so, we have 1,000 students in our building, K-8. So, would that make sense? Or you can say something like, would it make sense for 495 students to be in a classroom? How many people are in our classroom? When you think it's about the average number, you can throw that word in there, the average number of people who would be in this amount of space. You can even say something like, well, this room right here is, whatever, 20 by 30 feet or something like that. And in this amount of space, we have this many people and it's kind of comfortable. Do you think that would that make number sense to have that many people in one room? But it's a really cool activity, especially when the fun part is when you work with fractions and decimals and you say, would it make sense if I said I had, let's say this was just a 4, if I had 4.5 children And they're like, 4.5? Yeah, could I have half a child? Would that make number sense? If you read that in the story problem, Miss Williams had 4.5 children and she took them to the store. It's like, no. So, well, why not? Why is it important that when we read our word problems that we see if it makes sense and that our answers make sense? But would it make sense if I said I had 4? And they're like, well, yeah, what's the average number of children people have now? I mean, it's fun because you can do so much with this. Would it make sense if I said 4% of our class was going on a field trip? Would you be excited or would you feel dejected if only 4% of our class earned PBS this month? And they're like, well, and then you can do that visual of what would 4% look like on a bar graph. What do you guys think? Would it be really low? Would it be in the middle? Would it be high? We're talking about percents. Like, what's the highest you can get? If we're talking about percents, and we want if it was the whole class. It's just a really cool activity that can be real small and short, but it can grow over the year depending on what you're talking about. And students during this activity, it's non-aggressive, it's comfortable, they're just talking, it's not a worksheet, they're not writing things down, it's not graded, and they have that ability to kind of comfortably think. And then as a teacher, you're gleaning where they are, who's comfortable saying what new things they're adding. You get to throw in your 2 cents worth of extra or rigor or, what have you, just fun, and pull some things from it. So fun activity, fun warm up, but not so much more than fun, something that kind of engages them, it brings them comfort, and it gets them into thinking in a way where they don't feel like there's going to be a penalty if they don't do something right. All right, so hopefully try this out. Enjoy your year. Thank you.